All right, I would like to call the March 15th board work session to order. If everybody would join me in standing and pledge allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. By way of announcements, I just want to inform the public that they are hereby advised that the audio and video recording of this meeting for the purpose of rebroadcasting. In terms of attendance, we have all the board members present. That's really good. In terms of recognition of guests, I'd like to, and scheduled speakers, I'd like to turn that over to Dr. Zerbe.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening we have 4 presentations. We're asking PFM to present bond restructuring analysis. This was a presentation that was given a few evenings ago at the March the March Finance Committee meeting. Zach?
Thank you.
And I believe we will stay seated here. There's handouts in front of you, and we'll have the conversation from the table.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Zach Williard from PFM. As Dr. Zerbe said, this was presented last week. It's literally the same handout, still has last week's date on it. We didn't change anything. Also with me is Allison Mackey from RBC Capital Markets, your underwriter. So tonight's presentation, we're going to kind of give the executive summary. I think it's in 2 steps, because the first step is an update on what we just did. And if you remember, last summer into last fall, we were here a few times talking about a refinancing that you had coming up. So if you open this handout up, so page 2, this is your debt summary. We always show you this each time we're here. On the far left-hand column, you can see highlighted in some sort of a color, I'm not sure what that is, but your 2009 bonds, that's what we were authorized last October to refinance. And if you remember, the plan was we were going to do that in 1 or more series over the course of the next 24 months, just depending on the market and interest rates and how everything was going to shake out, with the goal obviously being to save as much money as possible for the district. Okay? Now, if you look back on page 1 at the interest rate chart, okay, if you can kind of scroll back to October of last year, you can see rates were, a little bit higher than they are now. Rates dropped continuously into February of this year, okay? So it turned out that we ended up doing the entire transaction all at once because interest rates got so low, we could save an unbelievable amount of money. And I think you all did see the results of that, but it was great results. We did that via 1 non-bank qualified bond issue, which is going to settle here in about 2 weeks. So on page 3, this is just a few bullet points about that transaction, but at the very bottom part, which is what you care about, you can see that we saved $3.8 million. Okay, that is the net number. Unbelievable savings. I think at one point we were hoping that the high mark would be around $2.5 million, so this is well through even the high marks, and I'm not sure we even told you about the high mark, but this worked out really well for the district. So in the red column there, what that's showing you is how we took the savings. So you didn't take the savings all in the current budget year, okay? The way the deal was structured was we needed to spread the savings out over the next 10 or so years. So what that gave you was about $425,000 of annual relief, again, net of state aid, net of all the costs, to your budget. So again, almost $500,000 a year just through that one transaction. So very successful. Now, also just a reminder, this was what we call high to low refinancing, where we're simply taking the older interest rates from 2009 and replacing them with today's new lower interest rates, kind of like if you were going to refi your mortgage. So there was no extension of debt, same final maturity. We just lowered the interest rate, and that's what resulted in this high savings. Okay, so that's the summary of the 2009 refinancing, which again we just priced. That still hasn't settled. It settles in about 2 weeks, but resulted in about $425,000 a year. So is there any questions about that transaction before we move on? Okay. Yeah.
Just clarification purposes, I kind of asked the same question during the finance meeting, but if you're looking on what would be page 2, is column number 12 and 29 this new issuance that we're about to see gets
That's
out of?
correct.
That's correct. And then my last question would be, was the old bond series, which we just refinanced to become this one, was it structured in the same way where we had the first 3 years being, lower principal type payments and then catching up as we go forward? Was
Correct.
that?
So back on page 2, again, let's start at the left. The 2009 bonds, you can see there's only one small payment in 2016 because the rest of those were refinanced. So we're essentially taking those away. You're replacing them with column 12, which is your new series of 2016 bonds. Now, a lot of your debt, if you kind of take a step back to all the different transactions we've done over the years, is issued as a wraparound debt structure. And the purpose of that is to have the lowest upfront possible impact to the budget. So as you can see there's about $1.2 million of payments for the first 3 years, and then the debt jumps up to about $6 million number. The purpose of that, because at the end of the day, what the district cares about and what the state cares about is when they look at your annual payments, when you add up all your different series of bonds, if you go over to column 17 on the far right, that's your annual budgeted debt service, which is shown here is around $9.7 million roughly. So that's your payments when you add up all the different pieces of the district's debt.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, so the next piece, and this is the piece that we're here to really talk about tonight, that was just an update, is the administration had asked us to prepare a restructuring scenario. Okay, and we're actually going to use that in conjunction with the savings we just realized on that 09 refinancing. So on page 5, what we did was we were taking the series of 2011 bonds, which you still have, they have a call date coming up this fall, and a small piece of the 2013 bond issue, because if you remember from various restructuring scenarios we've discussed over the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of times you need to take different pieces of bond issues in order to accomplish whatever the goal is that we're being asked to accomplish. The goal here was that we would like to have $1 million of annual budgetary relief, okay, over the life of your debt portfolio, but it's going to be inclusive of the deal we just did. So we got $425,000 already of annual relief from that. So we're essentially looking for another, just under $600,000 through a debt restructuring. Now, as I said before, the 09 refinancing was a high to low where there was no extension of debt. When you do a debt restructuring, you are going to extend your debt a few years in order to achieve that savings. That's what helps achieve the savings. So we'll show you how we did that in a second. So that page 6 would be what we call the executive summary. There's backup pages behind that, but this is what we're trying to use to spell it out. So if you start in column 2, that is your net local effort, meaning it's your debt service less the state aid that you're receiving on it. So as you scroll down column 2, note that you're at about $9.5 million, let's call it, for the next 10 years. Okay, and then your debt drops off from $9.5 million down to $5 million, and so on. The red, column 3, that is the savings associated with the 2009 issue. So that's the $425,000 we just talked about. Okay, so that is completed. That rate's locked in, and you're going to realize that over the next 10 years. Column 4 in the green, that is the requested restructuring. Okay, so again, we took a portion of the 2011 bonds and a portion of the 2013s. The deal would be estimated right now at about $6.7 million. And as you scroll down column 4, you can see how we're getting that roughly $575,000 of relief to the budget. And then notice those 2 negative numbers at the bottom. Those are where we're taking the debt up front and putting it, we're wrapping it around your existing debt. So in column 5, you can see you're saving, you're getting the budgetary relief of about $1 million a year. And then in column 6, it shows you where your net debt ends up afterwards. So you go from column 2 to column 6, showing you about $8.5 million.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I don't know the rules here, but are you looking for a copy? Did I hear, is it possible, is there an extra right there that maybe
Sure.
people?
I don't know who you're pointing to.
Mr. Bickelman, or I thought I heard someone asking for a copy. Anybody? I heard someone say it's hard to follow. I apologize. I just wanted to, and if there is one extra copy, if anybody wants it. Okay. All right, so I apologize.
Okay, yeah, no problem. So again, so we went from column 2 in this scenario to column 6, which is the $8.5 million, which is net of the $1 million of relief, which is made up again of the restructuring, which is still hypothetical. That's just what being presented tonight. And the red, step 1, which was the refinancing. Okay, and the graph below is just trying to illustrate how we're taking the debt. And you can see in the graph, the green debt is where we're going to be putting, we're taking the 2011s and the 13s and we're going to stretch them out, about 3 years in order to achieve that relief. So you can see the debt, goes up in those last few years. So I think that's the gist of this. Two-step plan. Again, step 1, you already have that. You have another $425,000 of savings here for the next 10 years. And this would be a restructuring scenario that would get you to a $1 million goal. Now, there's lots of different versions of this, okay? You could get a little more than that. You could get less than that. It just all depends on, your budget situation and where you wanted to kind of achieve the savings. So I'm happy to answer questions about that now. I'll note at the bottom of column 4, there is a cost to this restructuring. Okay, so the gross cost is about $1.5 million. That's at the bottom of column 4. And then at the very bottom, you see the $406,000. That's the present value cost, because this savings is going to occur out 12 or 13 years. So it's typically an industry standard to present value that, because a dollar today is worth more than a dollar 13 years from now. So when you do that, you come up with roughly $400,000 cost and present value numbers to this restructuring scenario. Now that will fluctuate based on the market. So if interest rates go up, the cost will go up. If interest rates go down, the cost will go down. But right now, that's where it's estimated.
So if I may, just for members of the board, the Finance Committee had this discussion, but essentially this is one of the mechanisms for which the administration is seeking your consideration as we try to address the budget shortfall. This constitutes an option. It's not the number one preferred option, but it is an option, and it's something that we feel that it's something you should seriously consider. And the Finance Committee suggested that we bring this to get this on the table for discussion. If we don't have much discussion this evening, it shall remain in our dialogue going forward, in case this becomes a more prevalent option for us to take an action on. So at this point, we're not asking for you to take an action next week on this matter, but we certainly want you to start considering this as an option in our budget scenario.
Yes, in the green column, the item called total, the $1,554,000 number, that is the actual increased dollars that we would pay that have been present valued at 406 in the bottom.
Right.
So the actual out-of-pocket for us will be actually $1,554,000.
Correct, and that would come in the form, again, if you follow your way down column 4, that would come in the form of higher debt service in the 2026 budget and 2027 budget. So currently in 2026, the way it stands right now, you have about $5 million of debt service, when you get out that far. If you went through with the restructuring, you would then add on the $3 million of debt that you're taking from the front and putting it in the back, so then you'd end up with, about 8.5 out in the 2026 year. That's correct. Another way to think of it is kind of if you had a 15-year mortgage and you were going to extend it to an 18-year mortgage, that would be, kind of a similar type of event. So there's going to be a cost to doing that, but it's going to lower your annual payments.
How long are these numbers good for?
Well, these numbers are just based on current market conditions, so they've already changed since March
last
9th.
week?
Correct.
Okay.
So just similar, similar to the transaction we just did, we bring estimates to show you all, and then when we move forward with the transaction, when the market's right, that's when you actually lock in the interest rate. So So that would be in the future if you decide to move forward with this.
Do you have any comments towards what Brenda was asking, which was related to the total cost of how Moody's would judge that activity from the school district?
Well, typically, Moody's prefers the red column. They prefer high to low refinancings. Lots of school districts and other townships and boroughs across the state are using restructurings as a tool these days because of the various budget problems, up and down the line. So they do see this. It's not uncommon. The district has done this before. So, and this would be considered, and again, I'm not Moody's, but this would likely be considered a mild restructuring, okay? There are situations where districts have to do this, and sometimes it can cost present value dollars upwards in the millions, okay? So in their eyes, this would not be a drastic restructuring of your debt. This would be, more on the mild side. If that helps answer your question.
Kind of along the same lines, and I know you said you obviously can't speak for Moody's, but there was a lot of discussion at the finance meeting around, credit ratings, possible downgradings, and things of that nature.
Right.
Obviously, this isn't a positive, a slight negative. I mean, if we're borderline in terms of credit ratings, could a decision like this be the tipping point that would cause a downgrade?
So the way Moody's works is, they have different types of outlooks: a stable outlook, a positive outlook, and a negative outlook. So right now the district is a AA2 stable. If you were on negative credit watch, meaning that they're thinking about possibly taking action on the district, and they're basically going to wait, the next 6 months and see how everything plays out, this is something that could certainly tip their direction in the wrong way. Okay, this would be considered, this would go in the negative checkbox. Now your debt is only one portion of what they use to make up the rating. So this is not the only thing they look at. They look at various other things across the district. So this is just one piece of their equation when they go to rate the district. Now again, this would be towards the mild side compared to other restructurings, at least that we see and that we talk to them about. So I think that would be taken into consideration too. They don't just check the restructuring box. It also depends on how long you're extending your debt and things like that. So.
And this isn't necessarily for you, but more for the board members who weren't at the finance meeting, well, not part of the committee, but, I'd like to hear each of you chime in, who aren't on the finance committee, how you feel about this. That, it's obviously, it is going to cost us more. We can see the numbers here. We know the positives and the negatives going into this budgeting conversation, and many of you have heard me in the past say that I'm not necessarily always for, pushing the can down the road or kicking the can down the road, as we say, but we do know the predicament we're in. So I just hope that each of you, kind of just chime in and, where you're at in this process or what you think. Thank you.
Sure. How you doing?
Good.
One is there any flags when you look at our credit report and you assess our district, is there any flags that come to mind that the board should be looking at, the business manager should be looking at, that we may want to stay away from, whether it's our debt service, whether it's the tax rate we're at, anything on those lines that...
Well, the first thing I would say is that the district does have a very healthy credit rating. AA2 is only 2 notches away from AAA, which not many places have. As far as your actual credit rating goes, or your report, I mean, it cites credit strengths as above average wealth levels, favorable location near job centers in Philadelphia, credit challenges, ongoing budget impasse for the Commonwealth. So everyone knows that. Everyone's getting credit for that, thankfully, in Pennsylvania, not just you. Limited potential for future growth, narrow reserves compared to rating category. I would say that would be something that they're calling a credit challenge. Now if I look here, factors that could lead to an upgrade. Positive financial operations leading to a stronger operating fund reserve is a factor that could lead to an upgrade. substantial growth in the district's tax base, factors that could lead to a downgrade, material deterioration of the tax base, and structural imbalance leading to decrease in reserves. So that would be straight from their mouth as of a couple weeks ago, what they're looking at as far as the district. And that report should be in the bond sale document that I believe was circulated when we priced the deal a few weeks ago.
Two more things. One is, what is your, I know you don't have a crystal ball, we'd love to have one, but what's your forecast for rates in the next 6 months and we'll say the end of the year? As far as, do you see anything that's going to change the numbers here greatly that we're going to miss an opportunity if we don't get it in this month or the following month? Then I have one after.
So I'm smiling because that's a question we get often, and it's an impossible question. Page 1 shows you, I think, how impossible that is. If you remember back at the end of the year, the Fed had increased the reserve rate, and ever since then, interest rates have gone down, which is total opposite of what everyone was saying was going to happen. Now they have taken, if you look at the far right-hand side, they have taken a little spike up. But just, looking back at the chart on page 1, it's really hard to tell what's going to happen, with all the oil issues going on and the slowdown in the Chinese economy. Again, it's tough to say. Now, I can say that the restructuring itself will likely be able to be done if rates move, let's say, 0.5% higher. We can still do that restructuring. It's just going to have a higher present value cost to it. But it's not going to go away. And it's not going to expire, anything like that. So you do have flexibility in that realm. But again, the interest rates will be what they are when we go to do that. If you ask us to move forward with this summer, we can certainly come back and show you what the new set of numbers looks like and show you that the cost has now gone from 400 to 600, or it's gone from 400 to 300. We'll be able to have all that information for you to make the right decisions. But I can't really tell you where we think rates are going, unfortunately.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
And the last is, what is the commissioner fees from you guys for this? We tend to see a couple times a year, it seems.
Right.
So it's one that.
Sure. So all the professionals are paid at closing of a transaction. So, we don't bill you hourly for coming to these meetings or anything, but if you did ask us to move forward with this transaction, we're paid at settlement along with your underwriter, your legal team, the credit rating fee. There's a whole array of professional fees that go into the service. Now, the state allows you to pay those costs out of the financing, so you don't have to come out of your general fund to do that. And that's one of the benefits of Local Government Unit Debt Act. But those fees would all be paid at settlement if you decided to move forward with this transaction.
Any idea on the number, the total?
Of what the cost would be?
Yeah, on the bring down sheet?
Probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $200,000, I'd say.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I just want to ask one quick follow-up there. When you were going over the debt outlook, after Mr. Phillips asked the question, part of the negative part of that was the mention of a structural imbalance. We know just from conversations that we had at the last finance meeting, the way that things kind of unfolded last year, that, we're using fund balance for 1 year to break that gap. We're going to spend more than we're going to bring in, and we're going to use, fund balance to do that. So technically for the year, we will show a structural imbalance, unless, somehow we make up that money throughout the course of the year. That coupled with a restructuring, how bad are we looking in terms of showing both of those at the same time?
Well, so again, Moody's is, all the rating agencies are aware of Pennsylvania and the budget impasse. The whole country is laughing at this. So, while they're losing their sense of humor with Harrisburg, they understand the situation that all the districts are in, and that in order to keep operating, you're going to be spending fund balance as part of, your plan. Otherwise, you have to go out for these short-term borrowings. So, I mean, they're aware of that, and they'll, it's not like they don't know about these kinds of things and how this is playing out across the state. Again, it's hard to say exactly what the reaction is going to be, and part of this is also that this budget impasse has gone on so long that they don't really know what to expect now from Harrisburg and when you're going to get your money. So again, I mean, the restructuring will be a checkbox in the not positive category, but as to how they're going to really treat it, coupled with the current situation, I don't know. I mean, there's other districts that are considering restructurings currently based on these problems. So again, you're not alone in that boat.
Thank you.
Just to clarify one last thing from what Jim's question was, just to make sure that I understood this from the Finance Committee, but the $1.5 million in Step 2 includes the $200,000 of fees in closing?
Yeah, all the numbers.
It's not in addition to the 1.5?
And the $200,000 that's a conservative estimate, and I think the total cost would be lower than that. But yeah, the numbers shown in the red and in the green would be net of all financing costs.
Okay, thanks.
This isn't really a question. This is more to Mike's point of asking each of us to share our feelings on where we would stand on this issue right now. I believe Scott may have said something at the Finance Committee meeting, because I was there for part of it, about waiting until we get our facilities assessment before we move forward with any significant restructuring of debt. I think that's kind of where I'm at with this, that I would rather wait until we know a little bit more about our facilities before we make a decision.
If I could just jump in, there may be, there was discussion at the Finance Committee around those two topics, meaning restructuring and the facility assessment. But and I'm not speaking for Scott, but if I remember correctly, I think the clarification was that while we were getting a report from the facilities, from AEM, the facilities assessment people, it's not likely until sometime this summer that we'll be able to prioritize those items and determine which items we're going to invest in or need to invest in, possibly borrow or some other mechanism. So I don't want you to be confused with those two conversations, because just because we have the report, it's not going to delineate exactly what our, it's not going to be telling to make the decision that you had just stated. Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm just thinking that at the very least, when we get that report, we should know at the outset if there are many major red flags, anything that we didn't anticipate. I think that there's probably some things in that report that we're already anticipating, and I just would want to make sure that there aren't any surprises before we make any significant decisions regarding restructuring of debt.
Yeah, it's my opinion that once we get that report, we're going to have to decide how to fund whatever recommendations that we see, and that'll be, a discussion between finance and property and then the entire board to kind of prioritize the needs, probably from the inside out infrastructure, up through cosmetic kinds of things. So that will most likely be handled separately through some funding mechanism, I would think. But yet to be seen. I think the bigger question with this is, I think this is a piece of a potential solution to the budget, and I think it has to be looked at in conjunction with our current, budget proposals. That's really where this dovetails in. Do we sacrifice now, on the back end to gain something over the next 10 years? So I think that's probably going to be the dialogue that we need to have as a board.
The one comment I would like to make is I'm happy we have this option, because it's one of many that we can consider. So, being able to restructure something and save $1 million a year it's nice to have the option. I don't think anybody would say extending your debt is the best way to go, but at least we have that option. And, you know, in general, we're in a lot better shape than a lot of school districts out there that are already taking out the short-term loans to cover costs today. So, you know, we're in a lot better shape than other school districts. We should be thankful for that. We should be thankful that we have multiple options that we'll be able to consider for the next few months towards how do we get to the numbers we need to be.
Sorry, it's my infamous last question. In terms of talking about this, getting with what Kim and Scott were both saying, you know, with the idea of possibly having to borrow in the future, okay, and the way that we've structured things as of late, I guess with the field project, you know, we did 10 or 11 years almost where you're pretty much just paying interest up until the final 3 years where you're really starting to, you know, pay off the chunks of the principal.
Right.
If we do need to borrow in the near term, does something like this kind of force us to have to do the same thing along the same lines where, you know, we're going to have to bite the bullet and just pay interest for the foreseeable future?
Sure. No, that's a good question.
And then lump all the end of it at the end of, I guess, the next time it frees up, if we did this, would probably be 2027, 28.
Yeah, page 2, I think, is probably where you want to be looking. And again, on the far right-hand side is your aggregate debt service. That's what we think about when you're talking about issuing new debt. Now, in the past, every time there's been a transaction for new money, we usually present the board with options where there's different ways to do it. You can borrow the money level over 10, 15, 20 years, even 30 years. You know, you've always chosen the short terms. If you do a level payment structure where you say you pay $500,000 a year for the next 15 years, basically what you're going to do is you're going to take, you know, column 17 or column 34 and tack on $500,000 a year to borrow whatever the number is, $10 million. If you go with the wraparound structure, which is the way the district has, you know, been operating over the last few years, instead of adding $500,000 onto your annual budget, you're going to add on $250,000 in the upfront years. So the immediate impact is less. It's $250 versus $500. But the cost of that is exactly what he's saying, is that you're, you know, putting the principal out on the longer end. The longer end in your situation is, you know, out in 26, 27, somewhere like that, so that you have the lowest possible budgetary impact in your front years, right? But just like, again, if you go back to a home mortgage example, if you're going to take out the longer mortgage, you're going to have the lower payments up front, but you're going to have the higher interest over the life of the issue. So that's the business decision that's always been, you know, before the boards when you have to decide how you want to borrow these over the past and you know, will be going forward. But that's the right thought. Yeah, correct.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no other comments or questions from Mr. Willard, Zach, thank you so much for your time this evening, and we'll be back in touch with you.
Great.
Thank you.
Great job of explaining.
You're good.
Next on the agenda, we have 3 other presentations for this evening. Dr. Katona will be presenting as requested by the Education Committee last evening. So this item was not on the agenda prior to this morning. Due to the fact that we had the committee meeting last evening. The committee had decided that it was important for Dr. Katona to come forward and have this presentation. And following that presentation will be 2 presentations by Mr. Whiteleather and myself on transportation and the budget. So if I could ask the board to take their seats in the front row, and we'll go through those 3 presentations and then return back to our seats for discussion.
Okay, good evening. At some of our previous Education Committee meetings, I had referenced the idea that we were looking to identify new resources to implement for K-4 and 7-8 math beginning in 2016-17. So the efforts of, through the efforts of teachers and administrators and our math support teachers who are here this evening, it's become possible to bring recommended resources to you tonight, which we will then be looking to put on display for public feedback over the next month. So while we know that the 2015 PSSA scores were an anomaly, we also recognize a need to properly align our resources and be able to support our parents in their efforts to assist their children in math. These were the main drivers for determining the need for new resources to start with. We believe that the appropriate resources, together with a well-defined curriculum and strong instruction, will help our students grow in their math aptitude. So we had a process for getting to the point where we are this evening. First of all, we reviewed districts in and around Montgomery County to identify resources used by those whose scores were above our district 2015 PSSA percentages in grades 3 and 4. Again, these were districts in and around Montgomery County, and our findings led us to establishing that everyday math, the updated version, the EM4, whereas we're currently using the Everyday Math 3, and Math and Focus, also known as Singapore Math, were two resources that were most commonly used. We then had an initial teacher review of the EM4 product as well as the Math and Focus. And through that review, resources were provided in buildings as well as feedback sheets. Teachers had an opportunity to review the resources and provide feedback in each of those 4 areas on a 1 to 4 scale with different indicators under each. So as you can see, overall everything leaned more favorably toward Math and Focus, with some of the areas being a little bit of a higher percentage in terms of how much more favorable than in other areas. But you can see, for example, content of lessons, assessment materials in the program overall, teachers tended to be more favorable at 10, 9, and 12% more so than everyday math. Looking at that, we determined that we also needed to get more information then, because that alone wouldn't help us make a decision. So we also conducted a parent survey in February. This was sent electronically, and we collected information on parents' needs for supporting their children in math. We had 232 respondents in all. The way that the survey was set up is that there were 7 items that might be of concern for parents to help them support their children, and we asked the parents to rank their top 3. And in another slide momentarily, I'll be showing you what those 3 choices were. We also brought in product representatives to speak to a representative group, teacher group on site. The teacher group comprised about 1/3 of our K-4 classroom teaching staff. And during this presentation, the representatives explained technology components and parent support. They showed what some of the couple parent videos might look like. They provided samples to the teachers. After each of the 1-hour presentations, the teachers met with Cindy Golden, who is our K-4 math support teacher, and with me, and we debriefed. They provided additional feedback, and that feedback indicated that there was a stronger preference for Math and Focus. So we asked them, again, through our discussion, and then we asked them to leave their impressions with us in writing. And what we found, asking them when they initially came in, which of the 2 resources were you preferring? and when they left, which of the two resources do you most prefer now? And so 2 of them that initially came in preferring Everyday Math 4 left still preferring Everyday Math 4. 3 of them said either one would be fine. And there were 28 teachers altogether there. Each grade level and school building was represented. And of those 23, 14 of them had come in initially thinking that the EM4 or perhaps either resource was okay. But in the end, they changed their minds that they thought Math and Focus, after seeing the presentations and seeing the additional materials and so forth, that would be the better choice. We then also looked again at the parent survey, and it revealed these 3 top priorities: helping my child enjoy learning and feeling successful with math, challenging my child to think and reason with math, and understanding the current district elementary math program philosophy and lesson components. So we knew that whatever we move forward with, we would definitely want to get back to scheduling some parent workshops, having some information sessions, etc. But when we looked at what the parents were looking for, we also thought, as we looked at something, for example, as challenging my child to think and reason with math, that this was very much aligned with what Math and Focus had to offer. So among the key features that teachers really talked about, that we talked about as we debriefed and that we collected information on from all of the teachers in general, these were some of the top ones: that it teaches to mastery. That is, at the end of each grade level, teachers, parents, students would know where they should be with skills. It includes resources for differentiation, so that whether students are struggling with math, or they are right on target with where they should be, or they need more enrichment, there are resources that teachers can pull from to assist those children. The parent resources, there are a lot of short videos to help guide parents through how Math and Focus is instructed and what they might be able to do, pre-tests that guide instruction, that helps teachers to know exactly where the students are on the skills coming in. Math and Focus is set up for about 45 minutes. We have about 60 minutes in our schedule for elementary math every day, and so the 45, probably to about 50 minutes for instructing in Math and Focus allows some additional time every day, so that if some remediation or enrichment is needed, that could be provided. In our lower elementary grades, our K2, the program is set up in a way to help establish firm number sense development. It focuses instruction on standard algorithms and emphasizes applications with higher order thinking skills. Again, the PA core is very much geared toward increasing the rigor and higher order thinking skills. And the application piece of this really allows our students to be able to understand why they're doing what they're doing, why they're learning what they're learning. So how we would go about implementing the Math and Focus is that we would look to have it in the classrooms, in all of our K4 classrooms in 2016-17, to allow all of our teachers and students access to the core-aligned resource immediately. We would organize professional development for teachers and administrators over the next 2 years, that is 2016-17 and 17-18, although we would have one full day of training before the end of this school year, so that teachers would then have a basis for their planning during the summer. We would also begin to provide parent information before the end of this school year. We would be working with the vendor to schedule workshops for parents throughout next year. Mrs. Golden and I have been speaking with representatives from some other districts where Math and Focus has been implemented already, where districts are into their second or third year. We've been talking about their transitional processes and kind of learn, well, we will have the ability to learn from them, and we will continue those conversations. We would also like to investigate the possibility of district visits before the end of this year. Something that's really critical to this is to provide ongoing support for teachers by keeping in place our K-4 math support teacher through next year. She would continue planning work throughout the summer, and she would be a necessary resource for teachers throughout the transitional process. For example, there's certainly a list of things that she would be instrumental in, but things like supporting lesson and chapter planning by attending grade level meetings, previewing upcoming chapters to let teachers know if there is anything in particular they need to be aware of, looking at pacing guides, scoring suggestions, homework options, helping out with open houses, planning for district parent information nights, etc. So there are a lot of steps that would need to be taken in this, and keeping her in the position would assist in that greatly. We also selected resources for grades 7 and 8, and the process was different than with K-4 for good reason. First of all, 7-8 is the math teachers in grades 7 and 8 are in something of a unique situation in that they are teaching 7th and 8th grade standards, and they're also teaching concepts related to pre-algebra and to Algebra 1. And so a single source, a single resource for them is sometimes very difficult to come by. So at the beginning of this year, we began communications talking about how we were going to go about getting some core-aligned resources for them, and certainly reviewing the data results. So we purchased Sadler's Common Core Progress book as a core-aligned supplement to their pre-algebra textbook. The pre-algebra textbook is at least 10 years old, and so it certainly is not core-aligned. And so the supplement helped our 7th grade teachers help their students more with the necessary standards. The teachers followed up by examining resources with the subject area coordinators, and our 5 through 9 math support teacher, Jordan Fortier, continued to examine the data and investigate detail on resources and communicate with the teachers about them. And so the recommendations were made that for 7th grade pre-algebra, that we would purchase the Glencoe Pre-Algebra Math Accelerated and Sadler's Common Core Progress. So even though the teachers were using that as a supplement this year, they look at that as in combination with the Glencoe Pre-Algebra Math book, that they would best be able to help students meet both 7th grade standards and the pre-algebra concepts. The Glencoe Course 2 would be for co-taught and special education classes. This resource focuses on 7th grade skills, but at an appropriate pace for students who are struggling with math a little bit more. And it's also a natural progression from grade 6 Glencoe Course 1. We are using, if you recall, the Glencoe products in grades 5 and 6. 8th grade bridges, we would also be looking to get the Glencoe Course 3, which would be, again, for bridges, and that would also be for special education. This would continue the skills that students began to develop in grade 7 and also help prepare these students for Algebra 1 in grade 9. Again, for implementing, we would need to plan the necessary professional development for these 7th and 8th grade math teachers on the new core-aligned resources. We have already been and would continue reviewing the scope and sequence of courses and update them as necessary. Plan for parent workshops also. And again, provide ongoing support for teachers by keeping in place our grade 5 through 9 math support teacher. Again, in part to lead scope and sequence review and implement new resources, as well as he has also been working with the math specialist at Skyview to help with reviewing data and so forth from their first year of implementing their new series in 5-6, and that would continue next year. He would also, as Cindy would, support lesson and chapter planning by attending grade level meetings, look at pre-made assessments from the tests so teachers have common work, help the teachers with identifying ways of adapting those assessments as necessary, look at adjustments that might need to be made to make sure students have eligible content they need, etc. And then we would have, as I mentioned before, these particular resources available for public review if the board gives permission next week for us to move forward in this direction. We would have these available for public review through our April regular board meeting, at which time I would be asking for approval of them. And so it would be these math resources, and just as a reminder, within that textbook review would also be the textbook for AP European History and textbooks for the iLearn classroom and certification courses. These were courses that were approved back in the fall. And then we would have feedback sheets so that anybody from the public who wished to provide comment could do so. And that's where I end. Okay. Thank you.
It's important for the board to understand that these recommendations are before you this evening, and they're not exclusive in terms of their ability to be implemented. And what I mean by that is we have a distinct need to address the matters as they were so identified through the most recent scores across the Commonwealth, as well as here at Methacton on the PSSA test. As such, we clearly articulated the fact that our resources were not core-aligned, and therefore this is a recommendation that not only includes some parent feedback, also includes a significant input from our teaching faculty as well as our administrative team. So we want you to know that this recommendation comes from a broad spectrum of our constituents that have the best interests of our students in mind. Secondly, it's going to require professional development, as Dr. Gratone laid out. And most importantly, it's going to require someone with expertise in the math field, both at the K-4 level and the 7th and 8th grade level, to help steer the boat during the first year of implementation. So the board should be aware, as I discussed last evening with the Education Committee, that we did make a recommendation, and you did approve the recommendation for the 2 math support teachers that we currently have employed. They are classroom teachers, previously focused on math, either a math class teacher or a math support teacher, and they are serving in this math support role this year. That was for a 1-year term. We will introduce them into the budget if in fact it is the will of the board to accept these recommendations for the math resources. So with that said, I just want you to know that we'll be placing these recommendations on the voting agenda for the March meeting, for the material to be made available for public inspection. The second thing that we'll do following that meeting will be to send an email via our parent link service to all our parents to let them know that these recommendations and that these resources are available for public inspection. And lastly, we will come to you for final approval at the April meeting to adopt these series and allow us to progress forward with the implementation of these new resources. So while you may have several questions, we're going to go on to the next 2 presentations, and then we will take questions for Dr. Gratone and the math support teachers following these 2 presentations. Next, we have 2 presentations.
We'll just talk about that last presentation. There's a lot of stuff there. Long presentation, and I have a couple questions, comments that I'd rather get out there now while it's fresh in memory.
Well, the question will be then, is it the will of the board to take the questions in their seats where they are now, or would you like to go back to the front of the room to ask the questions, and then we can return back?
All right, if I could just also offer that we just do it after the presentations. You know, if there's imperative questions, then you can write down notes. You can ask your questions at that time.
I mean, if she'd like to give her slide presentation a second time, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Well, then I think we do have to go back to our seats so that the people that came can hear.
I'll ask for the board president, would you like us to return to the seats?
I think, I would like us to go through the presentation and then
Okay.
ask questions to the end. If people have questions, they should be writing down and taking notes throughout the presentation.
Oh, I got lots of questions. I don't need to write them down. Very simple, basic ones. But, but I still think it's better while it's fresh in everybody's memory that we have a discussion as it happens. I mean, it's up to you. I mean, I'll rehash it at our regular meeting if I need to.
We'll proceed. The next presentation, Mr. Whiteleather is going to give a general summary of the more comprehensive presentation that was given at the Finance Committee on the Transportation Improvement Plan. Mr. Whiteleather?
Thank you. Spending a couple minutes this evening to go over the presentation that was made available to Finance Committee meeting last week. There are a couple modifications to the presentation for this evening, but for the most part is identical to what was presented last Wednesday. First slide basically illustrates the PSER's impact on the school district looking forward. If you look left to right, illustrates our base year, which is the current fiscal year. The rows from top to bottom illustrate the salaries as well as the PSER's contribution rate.
We were going to do the transportation one
first.
Yeah.
I only have a handout.
You only have a handout?
Everybody has one, but...
Okay. All right. Continue.
So to the extent of seeing the impact of the PSER's in red, this is the gross dollar amount reflective on the expenditure side of the budget. The state currently, hopefully, continues reimbursing half of that cost. But at the bottom, you can see that the gross impact on next year's budget is over $2.2 million. So a significant impact, to say the least. Budget, as far as mandatory cost drivers, we spent a lot of time over the last few months going over what are the cost drivers of our budget and how those are impacting next year's preliminary based upon the Finance Committee meeting on March 9th. Basically, you can see the items listed on the left-hand side, and then the columns left to right illustrate current budget, next year's preliminary budget that obviously will change between now and final adoption, and then the associated increase. Obviously, driving the major portion of the budgetary increase is salaries and the applicable PSER's impact to our budget. So if we look forward to 17-18 and 18-19, this is a new slide that was added from the Finance Committee meeting. These are just future year projections of, again, the mandatory cost drivers, along with an explanation as to how that impact was referenced on the far right side to illustrate the cost trends that we're applying to those numbers. So budgetary assumptions as we look forward. As we had a presentation earlier this evening from Zach Williard at PFM, one of the options we are looking at for consideration is the debt restructuring. We spoke about the one component of the refinancing that saved us $425 and the potential of another $575,000 to achieve $1 million in budgetary savings. The early retirement incentive, which the board did approve last month, is projected to save us around $300,000. Obviously, this is contingent upon what ultimately comes in terms of number of people taking that incentive. Capital reserve contribution, again, the sustainability initiative, this is an item where we're looking to allocate increasing dollar amounts each year, $100,000 to achieve a $500,000 amount allocated for capital improvements across the district. The transportation review savings, which we will speak about once we're done with this presentation, is slotted to save us around ballpark about $250,000. Our athletic field escrow, that is an item that was recently added. The purpose of that is to establish a fund that at the end of the useful life for the turf fields and other related items as part of our $5.5 million project, we will have a fund in place to take care of that at the end of the useful life of the current fields and related equipment. We are including no additional staff in this budget. Local funding, state funding, particularly in federal funding, obviously there are projections in there that we constantly modify. The state budget, as we all know, is very much up in the air, and how that'll impact us positively, negatively, or no impact at all is still yet to be seen. And then lastly, any tax assessment appeals that may impact us either, again, positively or negatively. So budgetary update from our Finance Committee meeting. Our medical insurance, the numbers that are reflected and explanation reflected in red are changes from our previous update to this particular slide. So you can see our employee medical insurance has further decreased, reflective of our dental and life insurance having a 0% increase for next year. Our debt refunding, the $425,000, obviously updated based upon the settlement. Our North Montco Technical Career Center, the roof replacement, we'll be speaking about that during the agenda, but that is an item on that was added to the budget, and we'll speak a little more about that during the agenda review. And then employee salaries, FICA, retirement, slight increase from our previous version of the budget, and that's a live number. It's going to continually change as we lead up into our final budget. So overall, you can see our savings right now are slightly over $1 million with increased revenues of $300,000. We're just shy of $1.4 million. At the very bottom, just so you're referenced, what we were looking at when we first had our first official look at the budget, we were $5.2 million short. Currently, we're at $3.8 million. So obviously, there's been a lot of things that have transpired over the last basically month and a half as it pertains to the budget and the impact. So this slide is essentially looking at three different scenarios. Scenario A here on the left-hand side basically is what would the current short at $3.8 million minus our availability to increase taxes by 2.4% plus our PSERS exception, what would that give us? So that would basically take us down to the $1.3 million short. And then these items which we just spoke about, the debt restructuring, the early retirement incentive, and then the bus route evaluation, these three additional components would bring us down to a short of just under $200,000. The scenario B is the exact same format without the PSERS. So basically, it's if you add the PSERS onto this number, this is your short, your budgetary short of balancing. And then finally, scenario C is, again, same format with no tax increase. So we're still looking at doing the options here, but those numbers only get us down to a short of $2.67 million. So looking forward, what are some directional decisions that we would seek leading forward is up at the top is basically is Act 1 and our PSERS exception. Whether we're going to use all of that, some of that, is a decision that needs to be determined here as we, lead into the next couple months in finalizing our budget. Obviously, we have the component of the debt restructuring. We have the bus route evaluation that I'll be speaking about here shortly, and then the early retirement incentive. So these two items here, the debt and the bus evaluation, are items in basically in works right now, and certainly the debt restructuring is something the board may want to consider as we lead forward, basically leading us to, down at the bottom, the administrative direction on the budget. And that concludes the budget presentation. Do you want me to go right into the transportation?
I don't know if everybody has that handout in front of them.
I did.
Does everybody have the handout?
Is this a one-pager? Yep. So last Wednesday, we had a consultant come out to the district that we had engaged to provide us with an evaluation of our transportation operation and provide us with some goals, suggestions, ideas, plans of action that we would want to consider as we would move forward. This page that I passed out to everybody basically is summarizing a lengthy presentation which will be available on the district's website tomorrow morning, as well as the budget document that we just reviewed will also be available on the district's website as of tomorrow morning. So basically, there's a couple-step process that the transportation consultant is taking for us. First and foremost is the policies and procedures, determining who does what, when, and how that action impacts the final product, whether it's a field trip request, a parent complaint, any number of things that would be needed to be done on a daily basis. So as you can see, we'll be doing flow charts and policies and procedures that will clearly delineate who's responsible for what and when. The second part of the consulting study for us is looking at our bus routes and maximizing efficiency throughout our operation. It's basically a matter of seeing what utilization of our buses, stop efficiencies, number of buses serving buildings, any number of items that could potentially lead to us either reducing or eliminating one or more buses. So where we're at in the process is the consultant has met with our transportation staff and some of our building administrators. We're in the process now of delving further into more of the transportation routing efficiencies, which will be concluded here in the near term. Based upon the information that's provided from the consultant, we would bring that information back to Finance Committee and then ultimately the board for discussion and consideration as we would look at our operations for next year, but wanted to provide the full board with an update as we currently stand with that particular matter.
So at this time, I'd ask the board members to return to their seats, and we'll continue with the agenda for this evening.
Thanks for that. If you want. That's up there. Okay.
Yeah, so while we had several, presentations this evening, we gave opportunity for PFM to take questions from the board. Next, I'd like to ask the board if they have any questions for Dr. Katona and/or some of the two of our math support teachers here this evening to answer any questions related to the recommendation for the K-4, 7-8 math resource adoption.
Yes, start at this side.
Good. All right, I got a couple of questions. And I think you said this, Dr. Zerbe, so in both the K-4 and 7 and 8, the math support teachers were not in the current budget that we're looking at?
The math support teachers are in the current operating budget, but not in the proposed budget.
That's what I meant, the 16-17 budget.
That's correct.
Okay. And then do we have any idea of the total cost to implement the recommendations?
The total cost or the staffing?
Total cost. Textbooks, teachers, blah, blah, blah. the whole thing.
I know that the textbooks will be listed on the agenda for this evening. If you look at the agenda, the textbooks are listed as their cost. The staffing will be approximately $100,000. What we currently do, and what we would do in the following year, if we get your approval, is to staff their existing positions with long-term substitutes. So we use the STS service for that. And we would recommend that we would use long-term substitutes for that particular case for next year. So basically, those long-term substitutes will hold the positions of the existing staff members.
So you think that's about $100,000?
It's approximately $50,000 per year per each long-term sub for a full year. And that's what we budgeted for this current operating year.
And then what about the materials and professional development? I know you said it was listed there, but I...
They are for all of K4, it is about $150,000 for the Math and Focus. And then for the 3 different resources for 7-8, it's approximately $18,000.
Scott, you can have this.
Yeah, it's probably in here. Just didn't feel like looking at
You
it.
just wanted, okay.
Yeah, it saves me paging through it. Okay. And then the teachers were 100K roughly.
I'm sorry?
The teachers were 100K roughly, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And many know that I've been a big proponent of getting rid of everyday math as soon as possible. No secret there. But anyway, I like the changes. I like the thing of what's going on. I do like the Math and Focus program. I think it's very, very, very good. My daughter was in one of the classrooms that had one of the test or trial courses, and they didn't choose her program, which I'm glad, because I really don't think it taught that well. At any rate, my questions are, and my only concern is keeping the math support teachers. I understand the need for, coordinating transition of the curriculum between all the, the elementary schools and things like that. However, I think that should be done, in the departmental level, also within the folks that run the math programs. I think that having an extra person, quite frankly, don't think we can afford it right now. I have a budget shortfall right now, and you're looking at another $100,000 for 2 support teachers for another year. I think there's a way we could tighten the belt and make everybody have to, work a little bit harder, but maybe that's what we have to do. I think that the programs themselves are extremely well written. The costs of the materials on loan, as Scott pointed out, will be a big thing to do, and that's when you change curriculum, you're going to have that, and I realize that. Okay, and it's something that we need to do. The other thing I have is, and I know you've covered this before with previous presentations, when you have the children that have gone through the everyday program right now that are in the middle of it, okay, transitioning them out of it into the new Math and Focus programs, and also how, maybe you can touch briefly on that, on how that's going to go through from when they're going into 7th and 8th and then they go into the high school, okay? I guess my question is that part of your plan as far as you have this done, going down, now that you know what you're going to be using, how are you going to approach that? Because everyday math is so different.
We know so far from discussions that we've had with representatives from other districts that have gone through this process with Math and Focus, we have asked the question about transitioning, and actually some of those districts had been using everyday math, and they said through the professional development and the ongoing support, they made that transition. That was not an issue. In terms of our students moving on into other courses, as when they get into 5th grade and they get into the Glencoe, and then they continue through 7th and 8th with that as well, that also, we were also told that they did not have difficulty because they were very well prepared from the Math in Focus to be able to handle those other resources. And so, yes, we would, obviously, that would be a part of our plan in terms of the transition process, but we have learned from the other districts that it was not so much of an issue.
Okay, and your hope is to get this running for next year? Okay.
If I could just jump in, I want to clarify some comments that I made just a little bit earlier. The materials are budgeted for. So, and the long-term subs are actually, there's a budget item for long-term substitutes underneath the HR department. Is that right, Mr. Whiteleather? So in all technicality, that $100,000, because it was estimated from the current operating year, that $100,000 is in the budget. So both the materials and the textbooks, as well as that $100,000, is in the budget. I just wanted to make that clear. That's not what I said earlier.
So let me just make sure I understand. So you have a line item plug that is in there for long-term subs that get used across the district typically, and that number existed probably in the 15-16 budget, but then you also had $100,000 associated with these math support teachers that were dedicated for math. Is that so? You had a budget plug plus the math people?
No. So we have a budget category that between the conversations between the HR department, our finance office, and myself, we determine what we're projecting the need in terms of long-term subs. That's based on what we know about our staffing and what we've done historically, and then we budget that amount for daily subs and long-term subs, and then that money is currently in the budget.
So that's in the 16-17 budget?
It is.
So if I go back to the 15-16 budget, that same amount is budgeted plus the extra math support this year?
No.
No, so the math support this year came out of that budget. Okay, thank you.
I'm probably going to have a lot to say on this issue, being the education chair and being that I recommended that we bring this forward to the board. However, I thought it would be better to address concerns as they come up. I respect what Mr. Roth is asking about the math support teachers, because I remember a year ago asking about the same thing. I will say I was thrilled that this came up yesterday, thrilled for our K-4 students, thrilled for our 7-8 students. It's much, much needed. It was also brought up last evening that professional development and doing this properly is key. I understand budget concerns too. I understand that's a type, but we are here for education, and I understand Mr. Ross saying work harder, work smarter. This is a huge undertaking, and there is no way an elementary school teacher with one prep period and 25, 22, 23 little bodies, even no matter how much work they bring home at night, can implement a new math curriculum without support. And in many districts, I was telling Dr. Katona yesterday, she's a one-woman show here, they might have a math curriculum administrator and a language arts curriculum administrator, or let's say secondary and elementary. We don't. So not saying we Band-Aid, we do what we can. We're a smaller district, so for 2 years we're asking specialized teachers to help us. So that's just my take on it. from an education standpoint. It's also my take on it that if you're going to do something, even in a budget, to do something right and to do it well. And I was very happy with the thoroughness that was brought out last night and the thought process behind this. And I would prefer to do it as it is suggested by the professionals.
May I just respond to that? Because, and I appreciate you saying that, Ms. Reese, this year, the investigation, the analysis that has been done with data on math to support our teachers, to support our administrators, and to support our students, and getting to this point where we could make these recommendations would not have been possible if not for these 2 math support teachers. And I can tell you that going forward, while the other districts did say, you know, that we were able to make the transition out of everyday math and into the next, et cetera, it is still a different resource, and it will present different challenges. And our teachers do need to be supported on a regular basis by someone who really knows the content, and these 2 do, and they would be able to do that.
I'll start with a simple question. We'll take 4th grade math. I'd say the demographics of the parents, being that the kids are 9 or 10 years old, would be between 35 and 45 years old. What changed from when those parents that were 35 to 45, when they went through 4th grade math, what has changed in math that we have to teach it different? I mean, you have 2 plus 2, 2 times 2, the times tables, addition tables. So when I hear that we have to have workshops for parents on the way we're going to teach math, that scares the heck out of me, because the best teachers are the parents. They're the ones that when the kid has a question, the kid asks the parent. When the parent looks at their books and they're doing division with these little boxes and multiplication tables with slashes, and it looks like Greek to the parent, how do we expect the kids to learn anything if the main teacher, being the parent, can't teach the kid? I mean, right out of the box, we're talking about setting up workshops for the parents. I mean, that in itself, it just sounds so wrong. So I'll go back to my first question. What has changed in math from when I took 4th grade math and now when my son or daughter took 4th grade math? What has changed that we have to go spend a lot of money on books for a new way to teach it, staff? So maybe that first fundamental thing would explain a lot why we have to change curriculums. I'm just still trying to grasp what has changed from 25 years ago when I took it, or actually, no, I'm sorry, my math is off. I didn't have the right boxes. How much older?
Maybe that's why we need new math, Jim. No.
You were the
Mr.
old
Let's
just start with that one.
A compound question, and I want to answer the first one first. And I think the experts are going to be the ones that could best address that. Can we call upon our math support teachers? So I guess essentially, would you come down to the mic if you don't mind? Essentially, what we're trying to understand is, what has changed? I mean, we all are adults, and we've gone through exactly what Mr. Phillips is suggesting. So something must have changed.
I think the world and the expectations have changed from what a 4th grader 20 years ago is expected to know and to practice and to apply than what we expect our 4th graders to know now. And just thinking about how our lives have changed, maybe we wanted it to happen and maybe we didn't, but we have to come up to those expectations.
Could
And with that being said, from going through this with my fourth grade son now, when myself or my wife takes us 45 minutes to try to understand the lesson plan because they're teaching division differently than when we learned it, and we're trying to do the homework, how's that benefiting our kid when the parent gets frustrated and they just say, go ask your teacher? So you're getting rid of the most important teacher, and that's the parent. You know, that's what I'm trying to figure out, is what that aspect.
I think the calculations are the same as when we learned math, but how we get there is a different route. And I think we're looking for our children to know more about math than a simple calculation, which I think, if I'm basing it on what I learned in school, I was all about process, about the procedure. And now we're hoping our kids can learn more about what to do with that math and how to do it without a single procedure, how to do it in different ways, which is how the world works. We have to look for alternate routes all the time.
What's wrong with memory? You know, memorizing the multiplication tables, understanding how to add. I mean, these just basic, simple math exercises, they're changing how they teach it. I mean, what is wrong with, you know, exactly, 1 + 1 = 2? You know, why do we need to have a different way of getting there when just by memory you should know, without having to use your fingers or anything, that it equals 2?
I'll just say that it makes you a stronger math student to have alternates, to have different ways to get there, and to know when's a good time to just know the answer and when's a time that you can look for a different reasoning before it. And our expectations on I know state tests are the big thing, but they're looking for reasoning, and I think we're developing more reasoning in our students through these approaches.
So if I could, so if we're looking the spark reasoning, you know, as far as the ground level of just starting at 1 + 1, give me an example of what that reasoning at 1 + 1 equals when you get to, whether it's algebra, calculus, and further. What is that doing? What's that laying the foundation for?
Can I defer to my secondary friend here?
When a student is able to take and look at a simple thing like a 1 + 2 or a 2 × 3, if they can look at those math facts that you're talking about, memorizing them on a card, that's not being taken out of our curriculum with Common Core. It's staying there. But one of the things that have been fortunate enough to even go into the intermediate unit for different professional developments for ourselves is to not only look at that, but some of those are repeated. And to be able to just focus on, let's say, 16 rather than 32 facts that a student has to memorize, they have to be able to see the reverse. Instead of 2 × 3 is 6, 3 × 2 is 6. Why do we have to memorize both of those? So it's more of an idea of deeper thinking. So if a student can think deeper about something and find their own path to get to an answer, then what they're actually going to be doing is building a better foundation to when they get to the algebra concepts, the Algebra 2, the Algebra 3 trig, the pre-calculus concepts, and actually have a deeper understanding of those math facts and how to get it the most efficient way for them. I'm not sure if that, I hope that answers.
Yeah, and it does. And that's what I'm looking for in what you're describing. And I've seen that with my son and how he does math and what he does in his head versus on paper. The next aspect, as far as the parents, you have data now where students have dropped off. Have you had any correlation between the student dropping off and the parents struggling with the curriculum? Is there, I mean, is that why we're looking at the...
No, let me just take a step back. So I think while your questions are reasonable, I think I want to put an understanding for all the board members here of why we actually came with this recommendation. First of all, the student expectations have increased over the last decade or more. So all that means in simplicity is what we learned as, say, 8th graders is now being taught in 5th grade, those concepts, or taught even lower. So the expectations have changed. And the fact of the matter is that the PA Common Core is here, and it's the standards for which each grade level is assessed on the PSSA test scores. That being said, we're coming to you this evening, and we came last evening to the Education Committee for the simple fact of saying we know what the objectives are. The objective is for Methacton students to perform at their optimum level. The only way for us to accomplish that is to provide teacher resources and student resources and parent resources in order to together help all of our students maximize their potential. So we need to put the resources in line with the expectations. The expectations are those things that have changed. I didn't have algebra in 7th grade. I didn't have it in 8th grade.
You have to take a Keystone test.
I didn't have to take a test. It's different today. Why is it different? There's a lot of discussion we could probably have about why it's different, and you might be very averse at doing that. I just want to be clear that the administration and our teachers aren't coming to you with this recommendation on the philosophical basis that math should be taught in a different way or in a specific way, only that we need to meet the challenge of making sure that together with the families and the students and the parents that we have resources in hand to maximize our students' outcome and potential. That's the bottom line. So philosophically, whether we believe in PA Core or Common Core or some other core, that's not what we're here for, because we don't set those standards. People vote for people in Harrisburg who set that, and I just want to be clear on that. So you can continue with your questions, which are appropriate. I just want to make sure that people aren't losing the intent of why we're making the recommendation, because we're not either condoning, supporting, or not supporting PA Core. We're doing our job, and that is to make sure that we meet the challenges.
First off, nothing dawned on my mind far as whether it's PA Core or any type core. The flags that I see are the ones that we have to have workshops for parents, and something changed in math. Now, if the driving force is the state or that's telling us that we have to go along this, then I guess the next obvious question is, if we thought this was a bad idea and we decide not to follow what the state was doing, what's that mean to the district?
Yeah, so the assumption is in our recommendation that the parent workshops are designed to do this nebulous type of math that is new to everybody, and that should be our fear if we didn't articulate the reason for the parent workshops. And I think it would be helpful if we talk about why we're going to have the parent workshops and the types of resources that we're going to review with the parents. Because is it not true that the resource that we're recommending for K-4 is more in line with a traditional math program than it is with something similar to the everyday math program? So we're talking about mastery versus spiraling. We're talking about more math facts and things of that nature. Is that accurate, or am I?
I would say it's something of a hybrid. It is, it's more traditional in terms of the algorithms and teaching to mastery. And yet, I do think that, there will be some different ways that students, as we've said, there will be some different ways for students to look at solving problems. And again, I think the purpose of the workshops is to, let parents obviously communicate with parents, introduce to them what might this look like, what might you expect, your children to be bringing home, what resources might you access, whether online or through our teachers and so forth, if you need additional support for working with your students. But going back to a question that you had asked, Mr. Phillips, our scores, if you will, what we use to kind of make these judgments many times prior to last year were strong in K-4, in grades 3 and 4. And so, no, I wouldn't say that our scores, had something telling us that perhaps parents were unable to help their children. I know that there were concerns about everyday math from parents at times, but there was nothing of that because our scores were pretty solid. Again, Cindy had done, a lot of data on that. And then, of course, last year, along with the rest of the state, they decreased. We had put in some supplemental materials to help our teachers, to help our students along with what we currently have, but we would like to be able to have a very solid resource to continue down the path to helping them and supporting them.
When you refer to the scores for our fourth grade, and comparing with other school district or statewide, the demographics, are we comparing similar demographics for that fourth grade class to other school districts with similar demographics, just to make sure that our scores are in line?
Yes, I mean, the first thing that we do is look at our scores and, what are they, and have they increased or decreased along the way? And we generally saw a trend where they were solid until the point where some of the field questions from PA Core started to come in. Then we saw a little bit of a drop maybe. But yes, then at that point we start to compare with other districts. And yes, we are looking at districts that are along our same lines in terms of demographics. Yes.
I think
I'll go next. Back in 1979, when I was in junior high school and they introduced new math, we had these same discussions. And I personally wished we had a place for my parents to go learn about it. And when I took the state final exam and got a 54% on it, I was really upset until they curved it and I ended up with a high A on the test. Fast forward that to examples that you're talking about now, Jim. I went to undergrad for math and grad school for statistics and tried to help my 6th grade daughter with her Common Core homework. For one math problem, I had to go Google 6 different words in it, which is a challenge, right? Let's flip that around. Now imagine the teachers being handed this and saying, on top of your current workload, try to understand all those terms and be able to teach it confidently to the kids. That's a huge struggle. And, I think all the effort we can give the parents and all the effort we can give the teachers to try to make this transition work well is all in our best interest, because I don't think anybody would argue with the idea that, do we want our kids to be better relative to the rest of the world in math? Do we want to try to keep improving them? And, personally, I leave it up to the experts in the room to identify how we have to move towards what the state's mandating to us. So when they say this is the best route, I believe their judgment better than mine. I think it's good for us to understand cost and impact the budget and always question that. But, in terms of the direction and where we have to head, personally, I think, I'm leaving that up to the other people that are sitting around this table and other people that aren't here to give us that level of guidance.
the one thing I'll touch on real quick, if the state said, well, we don't need to teach algebra anymore, as a board, would we stop teaching algebra or we continue teaching it? And I think we continue teaching it. And with that being said, I think if there's something that is very difficult for the teachers to teach it, and for the parents to understand it and teach their kids, I think it's our responsibility to also look at this critically and decide whether it's the timing's right or is there a different approach to it. If they're telling us you have to jump into it with 2 feet and this is, you have to go buy all these new books, are they just trying to, the people in Harrisburg get money from somebody that wants to sell a lot of books? I mean, I don't know what their driving force is. I know as a parent what my driving force is for my child. But, and as a board member sitting here, just because it comes down from Harrisburg doesn't make it right. I have to look at what's going on in the community and the feedback I get from other parents and that are sitting with me and back to school night, and people out in the street. So that's where our critical thinking, just because the state says it doesn't mean it's right.
If I could just jump in, I just want to be clear that, PDE or the state is not telling us to recommend these resources. What you have before us is a recommendation from the teaching staff, feedback from parents and the administration to address the Pennsylvania Department of Education's PA core standards. So they set a set of standards, and we can choose as a district how to address those standards. We can choose to use resources that aren't aligned, meaning that, as a simple example would be that we're testing in certain material in third grade, but we actually don't teach it until fourth grade. That wouldn't work well for scores on a third grade exam. So the alignment really, in more simplistic terms, puts the instruction at the, before the test and allows us to perform well. And it's supposed to, that's why we have these resources. So I just want to be clear that the state's not telling us to do this, and I don't want you to feel that the state's obligating you to make a decision. We're making this recommendation.
Before we go to the next person real quick, Jim, I respect you're kind of a numbers guy, and you're asking questions because it's based on why do we need this? We have to look at every dollar. And I heard you say it's a lot of money on books. And just alone, and there are need versus want, but alone on our list of bills, we have $64,000 for snow removal. Now, we couldn't help that there was a blizzard. I don't know, I think 51,000 of that was blizzard and 13 of that was something else, I think, I don't know. But that's a one bang, shebang, gone, done, there's $64,000. For $151,000, 5 grades of K to 4 children get a better math curriculum for probably 8 years. Education keeps changing. I mean, you can't use materials for 20 years or 30 years because there are things like keystones and society changes, like sports. You know, and I hear people say it's math, but it's the way it's taught. You don't realize how much writing now goes with math. Math is no longer 2 + 2. And it might seem silly, but it's the way education has gone. So I'm just trying to give you some input because I think your questions they're your questions.
Well, the point I was making, it wasn't about the expense of the course or the books. The problem I have is when you have parents and that demographics of a fourth grader that don't understand the homework assignments and don't understand the way it's being taught, that it throws flags up. So it's not a matter of money, of what the books cost or anything like that, but you have to have an understanding, where is this being pushed from? Now, if it's being pushed from Harrisburg, and you get somebody that's getting campaign contributions from a guy that sells books, and he wants them to push this math program, we'll say, or a certain style of teaching, that's the only question. That's why I'm asking these questions of what's changed with 1 + 1. Now, the teachers that we had at the podium there, they brought up the critical thinking aspect. And I understand that. I know that if that's the whole objective here, is to look at it differently, so when they get to a certain level of math, that they're going to be able to do algebra easier because they're looking at it differently, because their critical thinking has changed and developed from a much earlier age. I understand that and I see the benefit. But when you have something coming down from the state, and you're having so many parents that have issues with it, and teachers having issues with it, because the teachers have to learn all this. This cuts across the grain of what they've learned when they were in fourth grade. So me being a numbers guy, it has nothing to do with it. The common sense aspect of seeing that so many people are having problems with it, and that we're just driving down the road because somebody thought it was a good idea at Harrisburg. I have a problem with that, that's all.
That's why it's the legislative.
Folks, we're gonna have to move along. We have a lot to cover and want to get some final comments on the subject from other board members.
All right, I'll go next. I'll try to be quick here. Dr. Katona, when you were looking at other districts who have implemented this, was there any looking into, did they require hiring additional staff, or did they already have some in place? Do we kind of look at their structure and how they were able to implement versus what we currently have and differentiating between the two?
The districts that we looked at, either I spoke with or Mrs. Golden spoke with their district math director. So they have somebody, whether they put that person in place, I don't know, but they have somebody in place who specifically directs, oversees math in the district. Some of them also have math coaches, throughout grade levels. And so their structures in terms of the people that they have in their curriculum offices are much deeper than ours.
Okay, that's kind of what I figured. If you had to talk a little bit about the transition, I know Mr. Roth mentioned transitioning for the children who are already in K through 4, and then being switched to a different. How in terms of the breakup of our schools? So you have K through 4 that we're contemplating switching over to Math and Focus, then to 5, 6, which we're not touching, to 7, 8, which we are changing. Are we comfortable with the transition from K to 4? Well, 4th to 5th, I guess would be my question. And then are we okay getting back out from 6th to 7th?
We know right now from conversations that have occurred between Mrs. Golden and Mrs. Euchre, who's our math specialist at 5, 6, that as the students came in from 4th grade this year into the Glencoe, the My Math Glencoe program, that there weren't many gaps there, that they made that transition very easily. Certainly looking ahead to next year, we are going to have those collaborative discussions about, is there something as our students are, first of all, as they're going from 3rd to 4th grade from, everyday math or any grade level into the, this new program, are there gaps there? But we do know that Math and Focus does have a guide for us to use so that we know how to address those gaps. We are then going to look at, the 4th to 5th and have the discussions and make sure that 5th grade teachers understand what's happening in 4th grade so that they'll be better able to deal with that. There is not so much a change at the 7, 8 grade level because, again, they've been using Glencoe there, but what we're doing is kind of building a better foundation for the students through the materials that they've chosen. These are other Glencoe materials that they've chosen, and so they're actually, just by their nature, going to be addressing some of the gaps that they've had there previously.
Thank you. In terms of, if we do go ahead with this and we switch over, it's kind of hard to have a crystal ball going forward, but can we have an idea of the commitment going forward to sticking with this? If we switched, are we looking at possibly switching again, 2 years down the road, or are we hearing from other school districts that this is the program that's going to work, and if we invest now, then we won't have to worry about jumping ship again, a couple years down the road?
The districts we've spoken with are in their, I believe one is in its 2nd year, the others are in their 3rd year of it. And so they've been, they've been gradually growing along with it. And they have been very enthusiastic about what they've seen with Math in Focus. Our curriculum cycle is, it's set up for a 7-year cycle, so I would not expect any big changes to be made anytime before then.
Okay, great. And just one last thing, I'll keep my anecdotal stuff to a minimum, but in terms of the, Common Core versus non-Common Core and, old math and how memorization was important, I was a great person when it came to memorizing math and math facts. However, there's a large number of students who don't have that basis, that they can't memorize as easily as some other students can. So I think some of the new ideas in Common Core math and everything is trying to help bridge that gap between the students who are great at memorizing and the students who need a different way of looking at things. And I think that that's an important thing that sometimes we overlook. Sometimes certain things are easy for some people, but they're not for others. And in terms of teaching math to my daughter now, I do the same thing. I look up some stuff, trying to learn the new language and everything, but I think it's important that you start finding ways to reach those kids who weren't just great at memorizing their fact tables. And I think it's part of an advocacy role. If Mr. Phillips thinks that he has these strong, feelings that this is one of those things where you can go to Harrisburg. You can be a strong advocate as a board member if that's something you firmly believe in. But there are those who don't necessarily agree that way. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
That is called a mute button. Just a couple of things. One, I think the Dr. Katona and Cindy and Jordan, you did an excellent job of the research, and I want to sort of take a quick back of my understanding of what has happened. This was an investment of the previous board to look into this based on scores. One of their primary things was the score results that came out of the PSSAs. So I do have my notes from before, just so everybody, I have third grade, Methacton's average score was 68.9 in math, and the state score was 48.5. So half the state in third grade were getting below 50%. When we get to 8th grade, Methacton was 42.4, and the state was 29.8. And I think the point here is that the way that the measurement system is, no matter how you agree to the measurement system or not, today's measurement system is X. This is the measurement system. We have a gap in the state and in Methacton. And what Methacton's board did, and I probably was questioning it 6 months ago, but looking back on it now, it was a smart decision to invest in these resources to do this analysis. And we need to continue with the investment in this process and follow through and get the best result for the mathematics program for the K through 8 schools. So I just wanted to sort of provide some history there a little bit. And the other thing is that some of the feedback that we're talking about was, I think, 238 plus parents that provided feedback that they needed support on how to anecdotally, we've heard also of how to support their children. So this is a response of Methacton towards that also as being an aspect of the school that is needed. And then the last point I guess I would say is that when it comes to the funding, I encourage all the board members to consider that they look at the entire process and consider the resources that are available for curriculum in Methacton and not compare us to those that may not have those support, and maybe the part-time resources is the way we have to do things for the time being. But to not invest into that one more year, to me, is penny foolish. Thank you.
Speaking of the 7th, 8th program, last year we did the pilot study with the 5th and 6th, which was a full year pilot study. When we decided to do the K to 4 this year, we did resources for teachers, and we spent a good bit of time making things available. And the 7-8 seems like it We learned from the previous two, and so it was a whole lot easier to do the 7-8. It seemed like it was a much quicker process. But do you feel you covered all the bases that you need to cover by doing it the quick way?
I wouldn't say any of it was quick. It was, there were many conversations, there were many different opinions on a wide variety of topics as we've gone through this process. However, in the end, in coming together, and with 7th and 8th grade, for example, last week, we all came together and addressed, even Dr. Zerbe was a part of the conversation as well. And, you know, we examined 4 different areas and talked with the teachers what, you know, so we know this, and this from what we've been talking about all year and what our data says. Again, you know, Jordan had everything together for them, and, you know, we reviewed the numbers that we've had in the courses and so on and so forth. And, you know, what are your greatest concerns as you think about going forward? And we discussed what those were and then what we might need to do to address them. And we also discussed, okay, in the end, as you consider all of the resources that we've investigated this year, as we've had the conversations, whether I had conversations with them, Jordan did, Deb Euchre did, we had many different people involved, and in the end, as they provided their rationale for what would be the best way to go, although some might have thought a little bit differently about it, in the end, that was what they saw. That was what they saw in their data. That was what they saw as being best supportive to them. And so, yes, I do think that we covered everything as we needed to. And I don't mean to say that as though now it's, you know, March 15th and we're done with it. We are continuing to address you know, some just day-to-day things that maybe need some attention as well as we go through the rest of the school year. So, yeah, I wouldn't say that the processes were quick, but I do believe that they've been thorough.
Thank you. Will there be parent workshops in the 7th, 8th grade as well as in the K-4? Yes, okay.
Yes, there will.
In terms of the leaving the textbooks available for public inspection, have you considered leaving the previous set of textbooks as well as the proposed so that people could see the differences between the two and understand, perhaps?
While that's not typically what we've done, we certainly can do that. I guess typically we're leaving the textbooks for courses that have been approved at the high school, and so that doesn't really apply, but certainly in this circumstance, I don't see why we couldn't.
Let me just jump in there. While we can certainly do that, currently the resources that we have are not aligned. So we have Everyday Math 3, is that correct? So Everyday Math 3 is a resource currently used at the K-4 level that is not aligned to the PA core. So if we were going to put any resources on, we would put the resources on that we're recommending for future use. And the purpose of recommending is not to do a side-by-side comparison to give us an evaluatory aspect, but inspect the resources to ensure that they meet the moral standards of the community and going forward, not necessarily as a comparison model. So while we can't put them both on, we wouldn't necessarily want to suggest that EDM 3 is I just don't know what the expectation would be at the end of this. Because if we get a bunch of parents that say, well, we want to keep with the EDM 3, well, we couldn't recommend to the board that be the case. So maybe I'm missing the purpose.
Okay, I wasn't seeing it from the standpoint of people voting, if you will, simply from a standpoint of people understanding what the proposal is and have an understanding of where children are now, the textbooks that they're using, and seeing what is the one we're considering.
And that's the purpose of our parent communication. So last evening, we talked about one of the most important things is making people aware that the board is considering this matter, so that it's just not happenstance that they check the website that says, here's what's on the agenda, or that they see the video of this particular discussion. But we want to let them know that we're having this discussion to make as many parents informed to inspect those pieces and to tell them the rationale and basically to summarize everything that we've talked about here this evening in order to give them that. So that was the original plan. But if the board wants us to put up both the materials, we certainly can do that. I just don't want to confuse people, because it will not be our recommendation at all to stay with EDM 3. And that's,
I totally understand that, yeah.
so when we put that out, someone might assume that they got a choice. And I mean, they have a voice, but I don't know if they really have a choice, because I don't think as a district we have a choice of keeping EDM 3.
We have two sets of classes of very qualified teachers that will have substitute teachers for another full year. Do we know is there any impact that we worry about from the standpoint of the students who experience that? Or will the teachers who are on assignment to do this work, will they give extra attention perhaps to those classes?
Mr. Harney, you have the most experience with this as Director of HR.
When we look at folks that are going to take over classes as long-term substitutes, we look at them through the lens of, would this person be hired here at Methacton School District? So we look at them with the qualities of somebody that say that classroom was now vacant. That person that would have probably been somebody that we would have hired through the process, through our processes. So we don't have any concerns about the quality, although every time you hire someone, you don't know for sure if that's going to be the best fit. We do not have lesser standards for our long-term subs than we do our contracted professional staff.
Thank you. And I just wanted to remember again, the cost of the books is already in the budget. It's in our budgeted number for books. I was very impressed with the presentation that you made. I'm particularly impressed with the fact that you are considering the needs of the teachers by asking for the extra support people to continue to be able to support them so that their job is easier, because I know that benefits the children. I also am delighted that you're going to do the parent workshops, because that is going to bring the whole circle together. I think I'm fully in support of the whole program.
Dr. Katona, was there any analysis done in terms of how we rolled out the everyday math program, I guess in terms of almost like a post-mortem? Was there problems with the implementation of everyday math that we want to make sure that we avoid in implementing new curriculum here?
I wasn't here when everyday math rolled out, so I can't really speak to that. Cindy, I don't know if you can. Thank you.
Oh, I can.
We have people that really want to share their opinion.
Oh, let me tell you. Now, I understand. It's a very good question, Kim, because that's one of the things that I wanted to go over as well, and I understand you have that. The main thing is, I can only say as a parent that had to go through everyday math 5 years ago, when it was first rolled out, is that there was very little introductions to the parents. In fact, I remember going to Worcester almost in the middle of my son's 4th grade year to learn the spiral method or the lattice method of multiplication. And, while it's really cool and everything, it would have been really nice to have that at the beginning of the year when they were learning it. So that's the only criticism that I would have, is that when you roll out the new curriculum, that emphasis be given to the instructional, to these workshops, to the parents at the beginning of the school year, with, all the pomp and circumstance you want to give it, but to emphasize that it's very important that they attend. If you want to have any idea at all, considering you're now calling, it's basically a hybrid program, that it would need to be done, with great importance. Now, you're still going to get parents that aren't going to show up. They're still going to call and complain that they don't have no idea how to help their son or daughter with the homework. But it's incumbent upon them to come to these workshops, and if you have plenty of them offered in each school at grade level, hosted by the teachers themselves, have them teach the parents. This is what's coming down the pike, and here's a couple things that you want to do. I think that's definitely something that should be done. I also believe in this curriculum there's lots of videos for the parents to work with, which is great, and I think that a lot of that will help immensely.
Just one small request, and maybe this can be done, maybe it can't. For instance, the teachers have an instructional book that basically outlines how they should teach that lesson. Would that be able to be posted where the parents could actually see the procedure on how to teach that part of the lesson or that homework page, where instead of trying to Google 10 different words and how to find a YouTube video to explain to you on a regular chalkboard, can we, as a district, set something up where the parents can log on and see the lesson plan, see how it's taught, so they can have an understanding, so they can teach their child? And I think that would take a lot of frustration out, because when you read the workbook, you weren't sitting in the classroom that day or the day before when the teacher explained how to do that lesson. So if there's something that the parents can go online and see in text how that's done and explain to them by reading it, then they can not waste 45 minutes trying to find out online how to do that. So I think that in all this conversation here, there's a common thread with parents trying to keep up with the student.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly a task for us to administratively to work with our math support teachers and to develop the program with the vendor in order to deliver those parent workshops. So it is something we need to consider, and I think we hear it loud and clear. And we knew this going in. We've heard it for the last number of years from members of the board, as well as from people in the community, as well as from teachers, that the parent aspect to this is critical. We get it. Our vendors get it, and this is why it's in the forefront of our conversation, and that's why we surveyed parents, because 232 of them said they need the same thing as that you're suggesting. So let us do that work. Let Dr. Gratona and the math support teachers, put together an outline of what those things are that we need. But getting back to our previous question, there was an implementation, and please, say as you recall.
Well,
and before you start, can we conclude this portion with her comments and then?
Do you have any others?
Do you have more questions? Okay. We'll let you finish up your
I'll make
questions.
this a brief. When we rolled in everyday math, we did it K through 3, then 4, then 5, then 6 each year, hoping that the students would help the teacher through as they move through, because as you drop in a program at the upper levels, it's a little harder if you don't have that background. So this upcoming year, when we bring in a new program, those students in 2, 3, and 4 particularly will need those transitioning things. So in everyday math, we did it. We rolled it in, but we're not going to do that here. We're just going to let everybody, so we'll have to build in the transition with support. And as far as Mr. Phillips's question about learning how we're teaching it, they have a reteach page for each lesson that the reps told us would be helpful for the first year, so that the parents would see how things are approached, and whether or not they use that daily or submit it weekly or whatever. I think that would really help the parents to see how the kids are learning it. Also, the online component wasn't available when we brought in everyday math, so there's a lot more online components with this one to help the parents.
Is there an additional charge from the vendor for parent workshops? Is the vendor coming out for those, or is that something that we're just doing in-house?
We are actually going to have a conversation tomorrow with our sales rep to talk about some of the professional development pieces and the parent workshop pieces and so forth. So I can't tell you that right now, but we'll be looking at that.
And then to piggyback off of Brenda's concerns about who's going to be teaching these classes that are going to be, that the math support teachers are vacating, I understand Mr. Harney is saying that you know, the professionals that we have in there are on par with who we would be hiring long-term or, you know, permanent positions in our district, but the reality is they're not. And so I do have concerns about the fact that we've got classes being taught for a full year by non-Methacton employees who don't have Methacton benefits, who don't get sick time, don't get paid time off. And so I do worry that there is a potential for a negative impact there. So that's something that I just kind of want on the record, you know, it's a concern. And then my final thought here, one of the first bosses that I ever had a quote on his wall that said, if you don't have the time to do it right, when will you have the time to do it again? And so I think that it's important that we're doing this, we're doing it right, because clearly the curriculum that we have is not sufficient. It's time to move on, and I think that we need to implement this in the way that the professionals are recommending that we do so.
Okay, that should end this discussion this evening on the K4-7-8 mathematics. I'm going to make a recommendation to the board in the instance of time here. Two other presentations, the transportation and the budget update, I want to hold at the end prior to courtesy of the floor so that we can have the conversation, but we also can get through the matters that are going to be before you to vote on next Tuesday night. So because of time, I'd like to continue with the remaining portion of the agenda. Before courtesy of the floor, we bring back transportation and budget update, and we can spend as long as we want to, but at least we've gotten the matters that you're going to vote on out of the way. And if we need to have additional discussions on the budget at another time, the board can choose to, you know, schedule additional meetings on that if that's the preference.
Pardon me, excuse me, Dr. Zerbe, I hate to interrupt this, but in the interest of time, we have 15 minutes left before 10 o'clock. The transportation improvement and also the budget update, I noticed on the agenda, March 22nd, next week's meeting, you don't have anything presented? Do we have any special presentations?
I have no presentations scheduled for that meeting.
May I make a recommendation either to you and the board president that we have those two items put in there as discussion topics for that, or have them under new business or old business for next week's meeting, considering next week's meeting should be a lot shorter than this one if we go through the agenda tonight? Just an idea.
We'll take the recommendation right before courtesy of the floor, and we'll determine whether or not we take your recommendation or we move on with the conversation. But let's get through the agenda, okay? So on the agenda, we'll have reports. The committee reports will be there. We'll have public comment on action items. We'll have the board meeting minutes, and then we'll have fiscal items. Mr. Whiteleather, fiscal items?
Thank you. 3 items on for your consideration next week. The monthly list of bills as reviewed by our Finance Committee, as well as publicly viewable from our Finance Committee meeting, as well as leading up to our board meeting. Same with the Treasurer's Report as well. And the last item was the North Monco Technical Career Center roof replacement. This item was discussed at our Finance Committee meeting, and essentially the North Monco Technical Career Center is looking for the board to approve a resolution. That resolution essentially is to identify the allocation of funds applicable to replacement of the roof at the Career Center. In a nutshell, essentially what they're looking to do is use $500,000 of their fund balance. The remaining share of approximately $500,000 The roof replacement is approximately $1 million, is a proportional share to each of the sending districts. For Methacton School District, that proportional share is $67,450. It is the recommendation of the administration as presented to Finance that the $67,000 be paid for out of fund balance, since it is a one-time expenditure and not a reoccurring expense. And with that, that concludes my report.
Are there any questions on any of the items from Mr. Whiteleather, list of bills, treasury report, or the North Monco roof replacement? And with regards to our two representatives on the North Monco board, are there any, I know you had a lively discussion at the first meeting about this particular item. It's my understanding that while there were concerns about the ability for the lowest bidder to perform, there has been subsequent research done and a document produced that suggests that the previous work completed by this lowest bid vendor does meet the requirements for doing this type of job, and that the architect under this job does recommend the lowest bidder for this project, and this item will be before you at your next JOC meeting. Any comments?
No, I mean, that's exactly what you summed it up, exactly how, as we know it.
Any other questions from the board on the North Monco roof replacement?
60.
No. It's 67 from our fund balance. It's a total. What's the total, Mr. Whiteleather? It's like 1.5 million?
Right now, it's $978,390.
Of which 500,000 will be from the fund balance from North Monco, and the remaining amount will be divided on a proportional share, ours being 67,000. Any other questions? If not, we'll have that on the agenda for Tuesday night. Next, under personnel items, Mr. Harney.
Yes, we have two compensated professional leaves for your approval this evening, one full year, one semester. We have one uncompensated leave professional. It's an extension of an uncompensated leave through the rest of the school year. We have 3 supplemental contracts on the agenda for your approval. 2 are coaches at Arcola Lacrosse, 7th grade and 8th grade, and also the remainder of the course sponsorship for Skyview Upper Elementary through the rest of the year. And we have 5 additions to the casual sub-list. And that's it. We also have the volunteer list, the monthly volunteer list.
Are there any questions from the members of the board for Mr. Harney on any of the items under his area? If not, we'll move on to the next curriculum and programs, the high school math curriculum. Ms. Katona, or Dr. Katona?
Okay, we have more math for you. We didn't want to leave out high school. So you have as part of the agenda curriculum for 7 high school math courses: AP Stats, Probability, Contemporary Calculus, Pre-Calculus, Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and Algebra 3, and Trigonometry. As I have been doing since June, I guess was the first, I've been coming to you with a summary of different courses that our teachers have written for your formal approval. This is something that is in our policy to do, and so I'm trying to get curriculum in front of you on a regular basis for your approval. These courses, as you look through them, you'll see some repetition of standards, some repetition of competencies, the way that the competencies build on each other, et cetera. And so I will be asking for your approval to move these forward to next week. I also have in here the textbooks available for review. We've gone over the math textbooks for K4 and 7-8. In addition to that, we are looking at the Western civilization since 1300 for the AP European History course that was approved in the fall. The cost of this is approximately $6,600. We also have for the iLearn certification course that was approved in the fall. 2 books. The one is the Learn by Doing Google Docs, and the other is a certification guide for students. That would be for that certification course. And the costs on those are $24,1325 and $1279.25. And those would be not for approval at this point, but simply to have out for review from the public over the next month.
Thank you, Dr. Katona. Any questions for Dr. Katona on the curriculum and textbooks? Yes.
I just have one simple question. The quantities of these, is there only going to be one section for each of these classes?
No, those would be classroom sets.
Any other questions?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines, especially when it comes to the AP European History, since this is a new course and we're getting 50 books. I mean, are we expecting to have that large of a initial taking to this class? Is this something that we've been failing behind that we should have been offering, or?
No, that the 50 is the most that we would get once all of the class assignments are done and everything. We will see what that number actually is, but it would not be any higher than that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, okay. The next item for your review on tonight and for your approval on the next Tuesday. We will have several items as discussed this evening by the policy committee for first reading, and they will be listed as soon as we can get them prepared based on the committee's recommendations. But they will be before you prior to the posting 72 hours before the Tuesday's meeting. For your approval, however, the 9 items under second reading. I did not receive any additional comments other than those provided at the meeting associated with the Education Committee's profile update. So I know there was some interest in providing me some recommendations. I did not receive any, so it's likely that the policies that were put before you for first reading will be similar to those, or if not the same, for second reading. Any questions on policy? Okay, next, other items, gifts and donations. As you can see, there's no gifts or donations. There is trip to approve, trip for the Arcola Science Fair team and Methacton High School Science Fair Club to Penn State University on May 15th. Cost to the district will be substitutes. Any questions on the trip? If not, commencement exercises. Just have a few words to say about that, and that way it'll help you kind of frame our discussion if there is any. March is typically the month when the board approves the graduation date. Currently, we are slated for Monday, June 13th, as the last day of school. Therefore, I will be seeking approval from the board to set the 15-16 graduation date at our voting meeting next week. It is only fair that I share some information and make my recommendation this evening for your consideration and possible discussion. Tradition, I am told, is that we do not graduate on Fridays. I have not been fully apprised of this rationale, but nonetheless, I believe you should know that apparently is our tradition. Under the law, we are required to send students to school for 180 days and for secondary students to complete 990 hours of instruction to qualify for the maximum state reimbursement subsidies. If we choose to graduate on Thursday, June 9th, we will forego $12,655 in state subsidy. If we graduate on Friday evening, we will meet the requirements and we will meet the requirements. Other options may be that we graduate on a weekend or even the Monday, which is the last day of school. I don't necessarily recommend that, but after doing some research of our neighboring districts, we found that Wissahickon graduates on the second Thursday in June every year with Friday as the rain date. Both Souderton and Perk Valley are graduating Friday, June 10th. This year, Perk Valley always graduates on Fridays and moves indoors if it rains. North Penn typically graduates on Thursdays with Fridays as a rain date. This same information is being shared with representatives of the senior class, and we are seeking their input. Ultimately, the date of graduation is my responsibility to recommend, and the board's to finalize. I anticipate hearing back from the high school principal on their conversation with a subset of the graduates. In the meantime, it'll be currently my recommendation going into next Tuesday that we plan for graduation on Friday, June 10th, 2016, and go indoors if weather is required. Any comments or questions on the matter? Sorry?
Rain date?
The rain date is the same date. So, for example, we will be monitoring the weather, and we will likely be preparing for both in and outdoor graduation depending on what the weather forecast suggests. If it's suggesting clear skies all week, we're not going to plan for indoors. But if there's a chance, we're going to be prepared at the moment's notice to go indoors. And as you know, the last two graduations have been indoors, and we're well prepared, and we believe we have a system in place that does a reasonably good job of keeping this celebration at its highest peak.
A question?
We could do it in the rain. That is true.
Will we have the thoughts of the students by next Tuesday?
That is my plan. I believe the principal was either meeting today or tomorrow with the students. So it's my intent to share that information with you as far in advance as possible for your consideration. But, again, we can decide this on Tuesday. I just want to let you know that that's where my thinking is right now. I think it's appropriate for us to consider Friday, giving all the information and the fact that while it may be tradition in Methacton, we apparently are changing several traditions this year as the field opens up a new opportunity for us to, start anew.
Any other questions related to that?
Yep.
Okay.
That's your... So it's dates for board members' calendars are listed there. There's old business, new business, and I guess I want to turn it back over to the board president for any of those items now and consideration of Mr. Roth's recommendation prior to courtesy of the floor.
Herb, I think that's a good recommendation given the time. We had a lot of great conversations, a lot of good thoughts and comments so far tonight, which has created a lot of time. So let's move discussion around those two other presentations to the regular board meeting, and keep our fingers crossed that we can go through those efficiently. So we have those dates on the calendars for the board members. Let's see, any old business or new business? We don't need to talk. We don't have any there. Okay. And then now I guess we'll open it up to the courtesy of the floor.
Candy Alaba Egoville. In reference to your new math program, I also sat in this room and listened to a presentation, a great presentation given about everyday math, and the program failed. And test scores showed that. Common Core has not been proven yet. The jury is still out on how well our children are going to do. What I did not hear tonight is how much is all this going to cost the taxpayers? You put out a survey. How many parents were surveyed? We saw 238 responded, and you're basing your decision on this math program on 238 people. I think we have a whole lot more parents than 238. And it says to me they're apathetic until it comes time to do the Common Core math. And no offense to these two nice people, math is math. 1 + 1 = 2. You don't have to find other ways to figure out an equation to 2 × 6. I learned the old math, which is not all math, it was math. I can do math in my head. I had to learn memorize math. It was called repetition. Children are not taught repetition because the teachers have to move on so fast. They have X amount of time to teach the children. That's not the teacher's fault. That's the way the education system has come about in this country. This is Common Core. This was pushed by the federal government. because we want to keep up with other countries in the world. They're way ahead of us. We're never going to catch up to them. But when you have elementary school kids who are being taught algebra in 5th grade, really? They need to be learning the basics of math. I mean, granted, I was never good at algebra. I didn't care about algebra or geometry or trigonometry. I never took any of that. My basic math got me through life. I can count change in my head. I can change in my pocket. I can add, subtract, multiply, divide in my head. I don't need a calculator. But the thing is, when you push this on younger kids, you stress them out. You're going to make this younger generation nuts. But the fact is, we're spending $166,000 on books for 4 courses. What's going to happen with the everyday math books, the thousands of dollars we spent for those books? They're just going to be thrown away? There's going to be money down the toilet? And 5 years from now, you may come back and say, well, Common Core isn't working. We got to get these new books. We put a reading program in place years ago called Storytown or whatever it was supposed to improve our reading scores, and they had these dribbles or dibbles or whatever it was. Our reading scores didn't go up. And there's basics to learning to read. And I know this because I taught all 3 of my children to read before they went to kindergarten. I was not a teacher, I was not certified, and I didn't get paid. They learned to read. It's really not that hard if the teacher, this puts a lot of stress on the teachers. Then they're going to come back and say they want more money because they have to do the teachers have to learn Common Core? Because my daughter went to college and she didn't have to do the Common Core math when she got her teaching degree. So this is going to be more money. This has to be addressed. Right now you're concerned about the teachers, the administrators, and the students. But you're going to come back to the majority of the taxpayers and say, we have to pay for all this because it's for the good of the students. And I heard that years ago with everyday math, and they're reading, it's for the goods of the student, and it's being cast aside. So $166,000 is a lot of money for books when you're buying tablets and Chrome and everything for the children too. So you need to really look at all the implications of this. But No Child Left Behind was supposed to improve our test scores. That was held up as the example on how well our kids were going to do. That's gone because apparently it was an abject failure according to the teachers. But if the school districts and the teachers have an issue with the state telling them what they have to teach their kids, then you need to stand up to the state. The teachers' union is the strongest union in this country. They can stand up and say no if they believe it's going to hurt them and it's going to hurt their students. But they don't do it till it's too late, till the program fails. But we're spending a lot of money on a program that the jury's still out on. This is a new phenomenon. But when it comes down to math, it's 1 + 1 = 2. You go from point A to B. You don't go from point A and take the long way around to point B, because that confuses. I mean, I feel sorry for you parents who have children in school today. I really do feel sorry for you, because your children are going to be teaching you if they learn it. I mean, my son does math every day at his job, and he learned basic math. And he graduated with very high scores in math from this school district. And he learned the basic math. He had A's in math when he graduated. So, to me, sometimes if it's not broke, you don't have to fix it. And I think maybe I'm showing my age, but maybe if we got back to the basics, our kids would lose, and they would be less stressful, and there would be less issues with them when they become teenagers and in high school. So it's something you really need to think about. You need to consider the rest of us in the room and in the school district that are non-parents in this school district, that have no children here, and take us into consideration when you make these decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Candy. Anybody else?
John Andrews, Lower Providence. I have a lot of things on my mind to say, but try to be selective. One of the things that you seem willing to defer to next week is talk about the budget. And, we're now at the Ides of March 15th. And last week, as a member of the public, I heard for the first time that this year's budget has problems, maybe a deficit expected of over $800,000. Is that correct, Dr. Zerbe, that something to that effect was said last week?
That was stated.
Yes, thank you. You're being offered several options, index plus exception, no index, no exception. You're being offered a debt refinancing that, when it was offered under slightly different circumstances, but with the same strategy a couple years ago, that board unanimously was in opposition. It's the there was a fair amount of discussion and excellent questioning last week by members of the Finance Committee, and one of the members of the administration said that 95% of the budget is mandatory, and one view of that is that, that the administration controls and the taxpayers are on the hook. The board doesn't have any choice. And, I think of mandatory as the 180-day school year, but there are various ways to get a balanced budget, and I think it is the responsibility of the board to determine what the parameters are, and for the superintendent who works for the board to attain their goals while still satisfying school code in its various details. So I'm a little disappointed that the board-level discussions on the budget are being deferred another week. I also mentioned that the superintendent last week at the committee meeting indicated that he would look at a plan for program cuts and furloughs that would be required to meet some of the lower tax increase possibilities. It seemed to me like he was saying that if that's imposed on the administration, well, some of the other tasks that are already in their job jar will get deferred. It's a massive task to look at program reductions, whereas it's an easy task to accept Zach Willard's proposal to save $500 and some $1,000 extra out of next year's budget. And relative to refinancing those bonds, I think that that might be a good thing to have in your back pocket for whatever crises come down the road in 2, 3, or 4 years. But I think we have declining enrollment. We do not have declining teacher staff. So there's a structural defect in my mind, and it's not the first time I've said that. So I think, and when it comes to furloughs, that is more the the burden of the board rather than the superintendent. The superintendent has to deal with staff on a day in and day out basis. The board's function is to provide education and a fair level of taxes on the property owners. So I thank you for paying attention.
Thanks, John. Anybody else? Brian?
Brian Earnshaw, Lower Providence. One question on the refinancing. I received a copy of the chart of the Finance Committee meeting, and there's a step 1 and a step 2. One's the 2009 refunding, and the other is the 2011 and 13. Are they tied together? Does one contingent upon another? All right, just make sure everyone understands that, because the schedule's a little misleading, because it looks like we're willing to give back $400,000 of savings to offset against the $3.5 million of savings that we get from the first step.
No, they weren't trying to. They was trying to illustrate
That's what
that.
I thought, but I think
the illustration is
clear
you can offset the expense
so the
through that
$3.5 million
other
is
one.
in the bank. So if we don't do step 2, $3.5 million is in the bank.
Correct.
I think it's important everyone make sure everyone understands that. And the second point is on the graduation date, and I will confess that I have a bias here because my daughter is graduating. If you can, see if you can get a rain date built in somehow, whether it's moving it in service day or something, because to be making weather predictions at Friday at 11 a.m. when people could be traveling from out of town and other family members want to attend graduation, it'd be good to have a rain date built in there if you could.
Well, let me just make sure I understand what you're asking. Are you suggesting that there's an additional date aside from?
Figure out a way to get it on Thursday, scheduled, with Friday being the rain date. And to cover the 180 days, if you can, move it in service day or do something else. I remember, what was it, 2 or 3 years ago, we had all the weather and snow days. There were a bunch of in-service days moved around to get the graduation on Thursday, a rain date of Friday.
Right,
There's something else that happens on a Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, and that, you know, from your position, that makes logical sense, but I just want you to understand that they're separate matters. There's days and there's hours. So we're not so much concerned about the days, but we can't meet the hours.
But if you have an in-service day for May 31st, if you make that a regular school day and move the in-service to the end of the year.
But it doesn't work that way.
Okay.
An in-service only accounts for days. It doesn't account for hours, student hours, students.
Brian, your point is you would like to see the ceremony outside so the most number of people, family members can
Correct, because I think if it's indoor, it's
okay.
limited to 2, is it?
Yeah, the argument to that can be simply, well, now we have to deal with travel for 2 days, and you know, while that may make sense for your family and maybe others, it may not necessarily be reasonable for all.
Well, I said I have a bias, so.
I know, and your I would appreciate your
Brian,
comment.
she's a very nice bias.
Yeah.
You should be.
And I'm sure I'm not alone. I mean, I'm sure there's many other families.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't think this decision is easily taken. It's just a matter of, you know, it's one we need to make, and we need to make it.
I understand. I'm just asking you, if there's anything you can do, let's, you know, be creative if we can.
Thank you for you sitting through this whole meeting tonight. We should do that for you.
All right, thank you.
Any other?
All right, I think. To vote on adjourning. All right, everybody raise your hand so we get a unanimous vote to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.